Hello, church family. Here's today's 2 minutes. This is the 4th video in our 5-part series on the topic of moving from fear to faith as the driving force in our everyday life. It's based on what I call the Philippians 4 faith over fear formula. Paul describes it in Philippians 4 verses 4 through 7. If you struggle with anxiety, I encourage you to bookmark that passage and use it as a resource. In the previous video, I made a distinction between having anxieties and being anxious. Our individual anxieties very easily morph into a state of being or an undefined, overwhelming force. And so we need a mechanism for breaking down anxiety back into individual anxieties that we can respond to and deal with. I described taking an anxiety inventory, which is just a list that you write down of the individual things that you're anxious about, breaking that list down into items that you have some control over and items that you have no control over. When it comes to the anxieties over which you have some control, you can take a step further and break that down into action steps, things that you can do to work on that area of anxiety. But that leaves the second list, items that I have anxiety about over which I have no control. What do I do with that? Well, that brings us to the final 2 components of Paul's process, which are covered by prayer. The first part of the prayer step is a posture. And the posture that Paul describes might seem paradoxical to us. It's thanksgiving. As we're processing our worries, we actually do so from a posture of thanksgiving, to which we might say, hold on a minute, I'm anxious. My life feels really hard right now. My world is full of bad things. What do I have to give thanks for? And this is precisely the point, because when we're in an anxious state, all we can see are the threats and problems. All we can see are the bad things. We need to be reminded that if God is our God, He has filled our lives with a lot of other stuff. Giving thanks shifts our focus away from the bad things and back to the big picture of a world full of God's goodness. That's what sets us up for prayer. And as we enter into prayer, here's what we give thanks for. First, we give thanks for God's past faithfulness. In our anxious moments, it's really important to stop and think about the ways that God has answered our prayers in the past. It's good to be reminded of the ways that God has already proven Himself qualified to answer our prayers. Second, we give thanks for God's present goodness. When we really stop and think, we recognize that our lives and our world are already filled with God's good gifts. So we stop and we celebrate those things. Third, we give thanks for God's future intervention. When we pray, we are praying to a God who already has a plan in place for saving the world. He already has a plan in place for saving us, and He even has a plan in place for how He is going to respond to our current crisis, the very thing that we're anxious about. And so we stop and we thank Him for how He is about to answer our prayer. Whenever we pray to God for help, we thank Him for how He has already helped and how He already plans to answer the prayer we haven't even prayed yet.